Okay, looks like we're slowing down a bit with people joining, so we'll go ahead and get started. Again, I'm Shadley Gray with Agency Management Institute. For those of you who are not familiar, AMI is dedicated to helping to elevate small to mid-sized marketing companies through various avenues and various help, including this webinar series that we do twice a month. I am thrilled to have Stephen Brent May here today to talk about launching your podcast. It's something that we were talking about before we went live that I have been thinking about myself and have been felt a little overwhelmed by the process of diving in. So I will turn things over to Stephen. If you have questions as we go along, you can drop them in the chat and we'll get them to Stephen. And then we'll hold a few minutes at the end for the rest of the Q&A. So here we go. Hi, Stephen.
Awesome. Thanks, Shadley. Thanks, everybody, for joining. I'm excited to talk about this topic. So we recently launched a podcast. And so today I want to talk about how to bootstrap a podcast. As Shadley mentioned, he and I were talking about how overwhelming it can feel to do this. And, I completely agree. As someone who has done it, I can tell you it can take a long time, or the things I'm going to talk about today is how we really got there quickly. So I want to start with the boring stuff, some intros, a little about me, my agency, just so you know why I'm here. My name's Stephen Brent May. I founded One Foot Over. And aside from that, I'm a speaker. I've been talking about marketing for years, agile marketing. I was an early adopter of agile marketing in the early second part of the current century. And so I speak about that. Also, I'm a volunteer with the American Marketing Association, and a big part of my life has been the AMA, and that will come up in the story about the podcast. I'm currently the president-elect of the Professional Chapters Council, which is the advisory body that oversees all of the AMA chapters around the country and helps advise and guide them to be successful AMA chapters. In a former life, before I was an agency owner, I worked in hospitality marketing. That's really where I cut my teeth, got started. But then I spent a good portion leading the global marketing team for a B2B SaaS company, and always wanted to be on the agency side. The problem was I didn't have agency experience, and to transition in my career, everybody wanted that agency experience at the level I was at. So the easiest thing to do, of course, is to just start your own. So when I left the corporate side, started the agency with my business partner. And then also in a former life, I was a theater kid, which probably makes sense when it comes to wanting to start a podcast and wanting to be, quote unquote, on stage. So one of the things that I can add to my title or my bio at this point is now I am actually the host of a podcast. I'm the host of B2B Happy Hour. I will tell you about that story, how we got started, what the podcast is about. But before that, a little about the agency. As I mentioned, founded One Foot Over. We are a strategy first B2B marketing agency. So most of our clients are in B2B technology and industrial manufacturing. What we really joke about are like the boring industries. We always say, if you can get excited about marketing pumps, valves, drill bits, chemicals, then this is a place for you. We usually work with smaller marketing teams internally. So a lot of our work relies on helping guide strategy, helping them use tools and technology to get more done with less. And you'll notice throughout the presentation and in any description, we believe in marketing with a capital M. So it is not a typo. We always capitalize the word marketing because we believe so strongly in it. So for the presentation today, as I go through this, I want to talk about why we started the podcast. And then as we go through that, I want to also share like how we built this thing on a budget, our process, if we had to start all over again, what we would do the same, what we would do different, and then give you some tips on how you can start one. If you're interested in starting a podcast, it's, I think we break it down to where it's not as hard as it could be. And then I want to share our tech stack, include links to all that. So if you are interested and want to use the same setup that we have, that we've made that pretty easy. And then just a few bonus things right at the end. So let's start with why we actually started a podcast. When you think about it, what the world really needs is one more podcast, right? It feels like there are hundreds of podcasts every day that pop up. So did we really need one more podcast in the world? And we felt like the answer was yes. So I want to share our origin story. My business partner, Hami, and I met through the American Marketing Association. We were attending a conference in Chicago called Leadership Summit, and we live in Houston, Texas. I had been on the board for the Houston chapter of the AMA for several years at that point, and Hami was just joining the board. We hadn't met yet, and we met in Chicago, got to know each other that weekend at the conference, and said, hey, when we get back to Houston, we should really get together for happy hour. And Hami sent me an invite for happy hour from, I believe, like 5 to 6 or 5 to 7. And I responded and I was like, who really does happy hour for just an hour? So she adjusted the calendar invite from 5 to midnight. We ended up hanging out actually till midnight or later, just talking about marketing, our careers. So as we went through with the American Marketing Association, I was co-chairing our annual awards gala, and I roped Tommy into being a volunteer. And then the following year, we decided to chair it together. And we were asked to co-chair the awards gala, and we put on a huge gala, which was the largest one in Houston's history for the AMA, over 650 attendees, a record number of entries. So this is us on stage at the gala. During the year that we worked together co-chairing this, Hami owned an agency and was thinking about taking on a partner or hiring some more people. She really needed, some support. She was looking to grow. I was coming up toward the end of my time at cPanel, which was where I was leading the marketing team, and I could have stayed there a lot longer, but I was, frankly, I was bored. I felt like we had done everything we could do with marketing. And we started talking and we're like, what if we do this thing together professionally? We work so well together as volunteers. We've really put on a successful event. What if we just join forces and start our own company? So we started an agency together. So over the years, Hami and I have ran the agency for the last almost 9 years. We spend a lot of time in the office talking, having conversations about marketing. We laugh a lot. And then our clients a lot of times say, you know what? I really love the banter between you two. I like the way you all play off of each other. If you follow us on LinkedIn, you'll see we comment on each other's posts all the time with snarky comments. Outside of work, we're really, we're best friends. So we have a lot of fun together, but we take our work really serious. We also go to happy hour a lot. Fridays after work, a lot of times it's like, hey, do you want to go grab a drink? We'll invite clients, we'll invite friends. And everybody was like, hey, we'd love to come to some of these happy hours with you guys. Our spouses probably get annoyed because we start talking shop at these. And so one day we just kind of casually said to ourselves, we should really record these conversations. These are conversations that happen kind of off the cuff in the office. And we're like, you know what? This is really kind of juicy information that we would love to share. That's a hot take that we have that a lot of people may not agree with. So we've always said this, that we should record these conversations, and imposter syndrome kicks in where you're like, well, really, do we have a point of view? Like, is what we're saying important enough? Well, we got to a point where we felt like this could really be a business development tool. We've seen other agencies launch podcasts. We've seen some that we've watched and we're like, you know what, this is really good information. I like their format. I like the way they talk with clients. We've seen some where frankly, we're like, this is really boring. We're in B2B marketing, like I said, manufacturing, industrial. It feels like it, you know, is a boring, like these are boring industries, but we have a lot of fun with it. And we don't believe that it has to be boring. So we said, how can we make B2B marketing fun and interesting to people? So earlier this year in 2025, we decided that we are officially going to start a podcast. So what does that look like? What does actually starting a podcast look like for a marketing agency? So let's paint the picture of 2025. Um, I don't know how many people on the call today are agency owners, but if you are an agency owner or just a business owner, 2025 has probably been wild for you. It has been a roller coaster for us. The year started off, we had high expectations. We were looking to continue growing like we had the past several years. And then it felt like the world turned upside down in the first quarter. We lost clients. We had team members who were moving, so they wanted to take a break from work. And it felt like everything was just kind of unstable, a little shaky. We're a part of an AMI peer group, and our peer agencies in the group too. It felt like everybody was feeling the same thing. We talked to some agencies locally, and it feels like everybody's in a very similar situation. So, was this the right time to start something new? But at the end of the day, it felt like, yeah, it probably is, because we really need to turn up the sales and marketing engine for the agency. And we can do all the things that we normally do, like content offers, campaigns, sales enablement, all those sales and marketing tools that we have. But it felt like, how can we get our voice out there a little bit more? We were already doing a lot on LinkedIn with thought leadership, but it felt like a podcast was the right way to start. But because of the landscape and because of how business was going, we knew we don't have a huge budget to start a podcast. We have several friends in Houston that have podcast agencies, and they're charging thousands of dollars a month, and it's well worth the money for the production, the strategy, the planning. We just didn't have that to invest in a podcast this year. So we said, what can we do on our own? So we decided we're going to do this thing, and then what do we need to do? So the first steps we took, we said we've got to decide on the name, on the format, on the vibe. Going back to our happy hour conversations, a lot of what Hami and I talk about happens over wine. And, we've done trips together to Napa. A lot of our life revolves around wine. I even have an Instagram account, a personal account, all about wine, where I just post about wine. So we said, how could we tie that into the podcast? And since a lot of our first interactions happened over happy hour, we were like, what if it's a happy hour podcast where we talk about B2B marketing while we're drinking? We don't want the podcast to be a podcast about drinking. That's not what it's about, but it's just something casual to tie it together, to make it a little more fun. So we explored the concept and we said, what about B2B happy hour? Let's just go straight into it. We're talking about B2B marketing while we enjoy a bottle of wine. So we decided that was the name. That was going to be the format. We started looking at, other podcasts out there. How are people setting this up? What are some of the podcasts that we like or that we listen to? And, frankly, I'm not a huge podcast person, so I had to go out and do a lot more research. We went to ChatGPT and said, give us some ideas for how to structure episodes. How do we make this thing work? And then the most important thing for us was to pick a launch date. Hami and I are perfectionists, and I know a lot of owners out here you feel like it's got to be perfect before you can put it out there. We've always been that way, and we said, if we're going to do this thing, we've got to let go of the idea of perfection, pick a date and say, it's going to launch by this date, or we're not going to do it. So we set a date and said, this podcast has to be live by August 31st. And this was probably in April that we had, I believe it was around April that we decided that date. And we said, this has to be live by August 31st. It's got to go live in Q3 of this year. And so that was our framework. We knew we had a name, a format, and then a date. So then it really was, what do we need? How do we make this thing work? How do we put this in action? So I went to ChatGPT and I said, we want to start a podcast. I built a custom GPT with our idea. And I was like, what equipment do we need? What's the right setup? How do we do this without spending thousands of dollars on it. We also reached out to friends that have podcasts. We reached out to our friends that own podcast agencies, and we're like, hey, we want to do this thing. What are some tips? What are some ways we can do it? So through the help of friends who have podcasts, through our peers, through ChatGPT, we created a list of things that we needed. We knew what our setup was going to be. And then we decided, we've got to get scrappy. We're not going to have this high production value. It's still got to be polished. We're a marketing agency. Still got to be polished. It's got to be professional, but we're going to have to get scrappy with the branding and honestly with everything else too. We knew that this was something that if we were going to do it internally, using our own designers, our own team, it was never going to get prioritized. So we said, all right, we've got to outsource some of this. But again, we can't spend a ton of money on it this year. And then at the end of the day, we just hit record and we went with it. We just did it. We let go of the idea of perfection and we launched. So I'm going to walk through how some of those things happened. When it came to the design, getting scrappy with branding, and with everything else too, we went the crowdsourcing route. We went through 99 designs. I wrote a podcast brief, a creative brief for the cover art. We knew that was one of the biggest pieces in terms of the promotion. We had the name and we said, all right, we need cover art. Let's put this out there. Let's invest a couple $100 in getting several designs. And Hami and I chose our favorite, and then we put it out there to our networks on LinkedIn, and we had people vote on which cover art they liked the best. Also reached out to a couple of other people, hosts that I know of other podcasts, and just said, hey, I really want your opinion on what you think is going to work based on what you've seen. So we did a crowdsource project for the cover art, and then we reached out to our networks for the actual voting of it. I will tell you that through the voting, there was a clear winner. Like, it was not even close. It wasn't up for discussion. So I'll share the final cover art at the end. But then we said, what else do we have? What do we have internally that we can use? So we already had lights. We had some lights in our office from some other work we'd done before. And then we have an empty room in our office that's about 10 by 12. And we're like, all right, this is going to be our podcast studio. We don't know the exact setup just yet. We know some of the things we need, but this is going to be our studio. So part of the research was, how do we do a multi-camera podcast with some laptops, some iPhones? Ami and I already have our phones. We didn't want to invest in camera equipment. So we said, how can we do this podcast with what we've already got and maybe investing a little into it? So you can see in this picture here, in the background, there are these white backgrounds on the wall. I'll talk about those in a bit when I go through kind of the budget and how we did this for under $1,000. And then there's some lights in the floor that they shine on the background. So in this 10 by 12 room inside of our office, Hami and I are sitting about 4 feet apart with tripods between our legs, our iPhones pointed at us. On that white table in the back is a computer with cables running everywhere. This is a total like work hazard just to look at this. But this is what we see in our studio. And then this is what it looks like in the finished product. So again, it's not what we would have probably considered perfect back in April, but it's polished, it's professional, and it works for what we're doing right now. We always joke that in season 2, we're going to up the production value, or maybe in season 3. So talking about the setup cost, and I'll share the tools that we use toward the end of the presentation. But when it comes to the branding, again, we use 99 designs. And so we spent $200 on the contest to get to the cover art. We have 2 microphones that were about $400. The audio interface that we had to use for the 2 microphones, around $220. The lights in the floor, $55. we had to buy 2 chairs because we had some chairs in the office, but they're on wheels. So what we found was we were constantly moving around, which was distracting. So we bought 2 chairs on Wayfair for $85. The backgrounds are these cheap pieces of plastic that I bought on Amazon that we just used like tack, like sticky tacky stuff, put on the wall to create this background with the light shining up on it. And then about $50 in miscellaneous like cords and cables for the microphones for our iPhones to make sure they're constantly being charged. So this came to a little around $1,100. But around this time, we had a friend who needed some help with her business. And she's like, I'm really just looking for some guidance. I don't have budget for a big marketing, retainer or strategy workshop or anything, but I just really like to have a conversation, spend a few hours with you all. I can pay you for it. And we said, what if instead of you paying us for it, you just bought us 2 microphones and we'll spend as many hours with you as you need to work through this. So I know that's not always possible, but we were able to do a trade out for the microphones, which cut our cost by about $400 here. So all that to say, you don't have to spend thousands of dollars on fancy camera equipment. It's, and some of the things that we got, like the lights, those weren't necessary. Like I thought it was going to add a cool effect to the background on the wall. We would have been perfectly fine not even putting the white backgrounds up and just going with a plain wall. So at the end of the day, there's other ways we could even cut cost, but this felt right in the moment. So I want to walk through our workflow and then talk about some of the lessons that we learned doing this, and then share some of our specific tools. So our process for getting an episode from idea to promotion. So we always start with a plan. We plan each episode. Once we decided on the podcast, the launch date, our format, we decided we were going to launch every 2 weeks. At first, we said, we're going to do a weekly episode. And we had a friend who launched a podcast. He had just celebrated 100 episodes. And I asked him, I said, how did you decide what to do? And he said, in the beginning, I launched weekly. And he said, at some point, I realized that wasn't sustainable as an agency owner. He said, I just didn't have the resources. He said, I scaled back to every other week. He said, and I've not seen a dip in my traffic. I've not seen a dip in subscribers. He's like, I'm gaining new subscribers and new followers at the same rate, doing it every 2 weeks. He was like, so my recommendation is don't feel like you've got to force yourself into weekly. So we decided that every 2 weeks was a good cadence for us. So we plan out our episodes in advance. We created a document with an outline of how we want the episodes to flow each time. And so we always start with our topics. And what is the topic of this episode? What is our angle? We've decided that we don't want to provide hot takes, so we always include what we call a lukewarm take in each episode. So we plan all of this before. Hami and I have also decided, because the podcast relies on banter and us just laughing a lot and having a good time talking about marketing, we try to spend the day that we record the episode not really talking to each other about work things. So we talk to each other less throughout the office that day, so that we're saving it for the podcast because we want it to feel natural. We don't write scripts, we write outlines that we follow. So once we've got the podcast planned, we know what wine we're drinking. We always choose a bottle. We talk about it at the very beginning of the episode, and then we talk about if we liked it or not at the end. So we spend about 2 minutes of the episode on the wine. That's all we really spend on that. So once the episode is planned, we record. The recording part is pretty straightforward with the tools we use that I'll share. So once the podcast is recorded, we edit. The editing is, because we're recording video, we're recording the video on the laptop. We're moving it into an editing software. And then once it's edited, we have an audio version, a video version, and then a written transcript that we can use for multiple things. And then we publish. So right now our schedule is every other Thursday at 5 a.m. And the recommendation for 5 a.m. was because a lot of people, when they subscribe to your podcast, they get the notification first thing in the morning before they go to their workout, before they have their commute into work. So that's a good time for them to listen to the podcast. So we knew we wanted to launch it in the morning. And then probably the most important part is the promotion. So we created a promotion schedule for the podcast, and I'll talk about the tools we use to do that. But when we launched this, we wanted to keep the podcast separate from our agency a bit. So we had a TikTok campaign several years ago. We created a handle called the B2B Marketers, and we did a test of TikTok. And we're like, we've got this B2B Marketers account on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on TikTok. What if we use it as the media company where the podcast gets published? So we've been publishing the podcast under the B2B Marketers, and then we cross-promote it from our agency. So once it's live, it's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and then we promote this on the social accounts for the B2B Marketers and for One Foot Over from the agency. I will tell you, the promotion part, we've been able to get a lot of mileage out of this. So the whole adage of the cobbler's kids has no shoes as agency owners, I'm sure you're aware of that. We've been able to use this podcast to get more social content out the door, to help with our weekly newsletter, to have more content for that. So aside from eventually utilizing this as a business development tool, this has also been a huge marketing resource for the agency because we're able to cut up these 30 to 45-minute episodes into multiple clips that we can share on social and just get a lot of mileage out of the podcast. So before we get into the actual tech stack and the specific tools we use and what we do with those, I want to share a few lessons that we've learned in doing this, what we would do again, and then some of the things that we would absolutely not do again if we had to start over. So lesson number one is just start. Like I mentioned, we are perfectionists. I know a lot of agency owners are, a lot of business owners are. It's our name on it. It's our reputation. We feel like if we're putting it out there, it's got to be perfect. So if we had waited on perfection, we still wouldn't have a podcast out there. So my first recommendation is to just start. You've got to get it launched. Just pick a date, put a plan together, and then get this thing going. If it's something that you're thinking about, just decide on it. Say, I'm going to do it. Here's when I'm going to do it. And then figure out the how. Lesson number two, be consistent. This is probably the hardest thing for entrepreneurs when something launches, is to just stay consistent with it, to just stick with it, because there's not always an immediate result. So it's hard to feel like, is this thing working? To understand, is there value in this? So we've decided every 2 weeks on Thursday at 5 a.m., this podcast is going live. I will tell you, making time for this has been a real challenge, between travel, meetings, client work, running the agency, finding that block of time to actually record and edit the episodes has been tricky. So we have an episode coming out this Thursday that we're actually just recording today at 5 o'clock because we had it on the schedule for last week, but some meetings popped up that we just had to keep pushing the recording of it. This is not ideal to record the episode, less than 48 hours before it goes live, but it's more important for us to stay consistent. So we said, you know what? If we got to be recording this till 8 o'clock tonight, that's what we got to do to get it out the door. So be consistent. Just make sure, even if you only publish once a month, it doesn't have to be every 2 weeks. Figure out what works for you, what's going to work for your company, and stick with it. And the third lesson is really more of a lesson learned. Something that we probably would do differently is find an editor. So right now, we're recording it in the office, and then I'm the one doing the editing. This is something that, I've gotten a lot better at, but I'm not a video editor. We're using some online tools that rely on AI. I'll talk about those in just a bit, but I would recommend looking on something like Upwork and maybe finding a podcast editor. So this is probably our next step, because doing the editing ourselves that has felt like the biggest lift for the podcast so far. The planning, the recording of it, the promotion of it, those are all things that are really enjoyable, but the editing has been the heaviest lift. So if you're thinking about it, definitely make a plan. If you're going to do an audio only podcast and not include video, the editing can be a lot easier. But because we've added that extra layer of video, that's made it a little more challenging. So how can you start your own podcast? If you're on the call or you're listening to this and you're like, I want to start one, but I just don't have an idea, or I don't know where to start. I put together a quick, five item punch list. And this is definitely not comprehensive and not everything you would have to do to start a podcast, but pick a theme, pick a hook. What is your podcast about? And B2B marketing is not a hook. That's, that's at a high level. I'm going to do a B2B marketing podcast, but what is the thing that's going to draw somebody in? What's the thing that's going to make your podcast a little bit different? And I know, like I said, we can have imposter syndrome and feel like I don't have anything valuable to add. I don't have anything to say, but I promise you've got enough experience. You've got something to add to the conversation that nobody has yet. And so you've just got to figure out what that thing is, figure out your hook, and then turn that into something that's marketable. That is step one. Step two, start outlining your episodes. Once you know what your hook is, once you know like what the theme, what your vibe is going to be, pick your first 5 episodes, get those outlined. That way you're not thinking about each episode each time you go to create it. You've got the first 5 and you're like, all right, this feels like it's got legs. If I'm going to start this thing, I want to have at least 5 episodes that I can move with. You don't have to record them all at the beginning, but figure out what those first 5 are. Build a template, build a format for your episodes. Are there certain segments that you want to have? Like I mentioned, we talk about the wine at the beginning and the end. We always have a segment right before we close where we go back and forth on something. It could be, what are 3 of our like least favorite terms in B2B marketing? Or guess what industry this website is based on the headline on their homepage. So we always have some kind of like game or interactive banter segment right before we close. So just figure out what is the format of each episode. And when you outline those, make sure you've got something that's consistent. And just once you get those first 5 on paper, it starts to make a lot more sense in your head how you can sustain this thing. Choose your gear, your software. Like I said, we were able to do this for under $1,000, relying on things we already had, our own phones, laptops, some trade out work with a client. So figure out what gear and software you need. If you want to do video, if you just want to do audio, those things make a difference. And then record a pilot episode. Like I said, just get started. Have fun with it. Don't feel like it has to be perfect. This is something that watching a lot of content creators out there, they talk about. They're like, and these are like the really polished videos that you see online and the people that have hundreds of thousands of followers. They're like, if I go back and look at my first video, or I go back and look at my first episode, that's probably not something I would do today. And that's absolutely true. So if they go back and look where they started, it's not where they are. And so if we're judging ourselves based on people that have been doing it for 5 years and that have the production value, and that's where we feel like we have to start, we're never going to get started. So for us, it was, all right, what works for us? What is our minimum viable product? And so that is my recommendation. Figure out what you need to just get this thing off the ground, record it, have fun doing it, and then publish it and promote it. I said, 2025 has been rough, but we're getting so much great feedback on our podcast from people that aren't even in marketing that have said, like, hey, I listened to it, even though I know it's about marketing, but I saw that you guys posted it, and they're like, it's actually really interesting because of the banter between you. It doesn't feel like I'm listening to a business podcast. So, you know, don't be afraid to share this, promote it. We're mostly marketers here, so that's the part we know how to do well. We may not know how to produce a podcast, but we probably know how to promote one. So that's how you can get started. Like I said, it can be as easy or as hard as you want it to be. So in the deck that Shadley is going to send out after, the deck he'll share, there are links to all of the things that we use for our podcast. So we use Shure microphones. These are one of the more common, more popular podcast microphones out there. They're about $200 each. There are definitely cheaper microphones that you can use. This was just what was recommended to us by a friend, and so it's what we went with. Because we're using two professional microphones, we had to buy an audio interface that goes into the computer. The Focusrite is the one that is recommended, the most popular. It was about $220. And so once we had our microphones, again, I mentioned we use our iPhones to record the video. So we just turn our phones, put them on tripods in front of our chairs, and use the cameras in our iPhone. We use Riverside to record the podcast. So this is an online software, really popular. If you've ever been a guest on a podcast, you've probably been inside of a Riverside studio. We pay, I believe, $30 a month for the plan that we're on. So Riverside is the tool that we record in based on recommendations from friends. We export the video from Riverside and then edit in another online tool called Descript that we pay $20 a month for. So there is a little bit of software cost, but we pay around $60 a month in fees for online software for the subscriptions. Descript makes it really easy because once you import the video, you've got a transcript that you can just jump to sections, and then the video is at the bottom. You can select the text and just hit delete, and it will delete a chunk of video. So if you make mistakes, you do a retake. It also has AI where if there are awkward pauses, you can remove these pauses. Like I said, if you're just doing audio, it's a lot easier because then you don't have to worry about how the video changes when you delete an entire section. But there's a lot of really great AI tools in there that help make the video look smoother, the transitions feel more natural. So Riverside, again, recording, Descript is our editing platform. And then we use Buzzsprout for the distribution of the podcast. So we decided to distribute on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. With Buzzsprout, you can publish this on like a ton of different platforms. It was just based on recommendations and our research. Those were the three where we felt like we really needed to be. Buzzsprout only releases the audio. So when we add it to YouTube, we go in and manually upload it to our YouTube channel. So those are the networks we are on. That's our distribution platform. And then Opus Clip is a video editing tool that uses AI to cut everything up into clips. And we use this for other things at the agency. So we take our podcast episodes each week or every 2 weeks, and we will load the entire episode into Opus Clip and say, give us 60-second clips from the podcast. And it will trim this up into sometimes upwards of 100 different clips in formats for social, in like portrait style, so that we can publish those on TikTok, Instagram Reels, LinkedIn, and just make the editing and promotion really easy. So because we record a podcast called B2B Happy Hour, I wanted to leave you all with a few bonus items before we leave. So all of the links to the tools and the software we use will be in the deck. But because we drink wine on every episode, I wanted to give you three quick wine recommendations. Some of these are things that we have drank on the podcast, and hopefully we will be drinking some of these on future episodes. But I have these in order of good, better, best. The Dreaming Tree, it's a red blend. That is a good grocery store wine that's under $20. Artemis from Stag's Leap, around $75. And then my favorite wine is Opus One. It can be upwards of $400. So that will be for like a very special episode, like maybe the 100th episode. But these are not affiliate links. I get nothing from this. I just wanted, since we have a podcast called B2B Happy Hour, I wanted to share some wine recommendations. Please feel free to listen, like, subscribe, check out an episode just to see how we're doing it. And then, if you enjoy it, follow along with us every other Thursday. Connect with me on LinkedIn. If I want to open it up to questions after this, but if we don't have time to get to a question, or if you have to jump, you think of something later, I would love to share our experience, let you know what we've learned, and connect with you and hopefully help you launch a podcast in the future. So with that, I would love to open it up to answer any questions that anybody has.
Do you ever have guests or do call-ins?
That's a great question. We have not yet, because we don't feel like we've got a good enough handle on our process and the technology just yet to open it up to an outside party. But our plan is, as we move forward with it, that we do want to bring in other guests in future episodes, other agency owners, marketing leaders, have those kind of conversations. But we want to make sure we feel like we've got our process and everything in a good place before we do that. But that is absolutely on the roadmap, because eventually the two of us talking to each other is going to get really old.
The next question from Catherine is, can you connect the podcast to any new business wins? Is it driving business?
So at this point, we're only 5 episodes in, so we've only had this going since the end of August. So at this point, we've not been able to specifically tie it to new business. One of the things that we have been able to do, though, is in new business conversations, reference the podcast and know that prospects have gone and listened to things that we've talked about on there. So we're very early in our journey with the podcast, and hopefully we'll be able to start tying that to specific business wins. But at this point, we've not been able to just yet.
Excellent. Joe says, our biggest barrier that we face is understanding if the view is worth the climb to start a podcast for our industry. How do you gauge this? What are your metrics for success?
So for us at this point, and that's something that we definitely talked about, is the effort, the saying I use all the time internally is the juice worth the squeeze here. For us, it was really, we've seen that posting on LinkedIn consistently has had a net positive result on business development. We send a newsletter every week. We've sent one, I think we just sent our 353rd last week. So every Saturday morning, we send a newsletter. We've had conversations over the years. Is this newsletter valuable? But what we've seen over the years is a prospect who didn't sign is on our mailing list, and then a year later comes back. And then they say, hey, and we've been able to see that they've opened our newsletter 15 times throughout the last year. If we weren't top of mind every weekend, would they have come back? So, have we been able to tie that newsletter directly to new business through that? Not a direct conversion, but we've also had prospects that have said, because I got your newsletter, during the sales conversation, they were like, this was a verbatim from a prospect last year. He said, when I got the newsletter, I read it and I said, this agency practices what they preach. You're doing the things that you're telling us we need to do. He's like, and that's why we went with you. So while we're very early in the podcast, we're hoping that we can replicate what we've been able to do with our weekly newsletter with the podcast, to where prospects and clients say, because you're doing this, we believe you're the right fit because you're doing the things that you're telling us we need to do, or we're staying top of mind with prospects. We're gaining new attention from net new visitors, people that have never heard of our agency, through this podcast. Because one of the things that we know, we're marketing agencies that work in very niche industries a lot of times. Our biggest challenge isn't necessarily closing deals that we've got in the pipeline. Our biggest challenge is awareness. Not There's not always this mass market awareness of who we are. So what are these things we can do that create more awareness of our brands out there? And yes, a podcast might be a heavy lift for that, but if that's the thing that can get more eyeballs on our website, get more people to know about what we do, keep us top of mind throughout that, quote unquote marketing funnel, then we believe that the juice is worth the squeeze on this. So while we're too early to tie it to revenue at this point, we're really hoping that we're able to replicate what we've been able to do with other marketing tactics over the years.
And Rachel asks, are you ever tempted to do a topic outside of the B2B stuff? And if so, what do you do with it?
Yes. So part of the format of the episodes is, like I mentioned, we talk about the wine at the very beginning, and then Hami and I kind of talk about what we've been up to for over the next week or the last weeks, whether that was travel or I went to a food festival thing. So we spend about 5 minutes talking about that before we get into the marketing topic. There was a recent episode where we were deep in the marketing topic, and then somehow we went on this tangent about like the new Taylor Swift album and what we liked and didn't like about it. So I would say that yes, and we do think about other things. Part of it is pop culture, and what's happened so far is like we'll go on these tangents on our existing marketing episodes. I don't think we're going to shift and start having other topics that aren't marketing related, but we have used the podcast to talk about other things that interest us, whether good, bad, or indifferent. That's yet to be seen.
Do you have you said in season 2 you might do something else. So did you set out like we're going to record 12 episodes and that will be season 1? Did you give yourself a goal of, okay, let's just get this off the ground and we're going to do it with 10 episodes and then take a break and see what we might learn for season 2? Like, what was your approach to a season?
Yeah, so initially we started out with the plan that we were going to do 8 episodes per season. It was going to be season 1, episode 1 through 8, take a break. Once we got started, we decided that we may not need seasons. And so we actually removed that from our plan. And now we're just numbering the episodes. In talking with other friends that have podcasts right now, it felt like it was all over the place for them. When we said, how do you determine how many episodes you do a season? And they were just like, till we run out of content, or we just picked a number. And I was like, well, how long do you wait in between seasons? And they're like, until we're ready to start again. So
Right.
it felt like there was almost no rhyme or reason to it. So we decided to scrap our initial plan of like 8 episode seasons, and we're just going to record episodes. And if we need to take a break, we'll announce it on an episode that, hey, we're going to take a break for the holidays and come back. So we jokingly talk about upping the production value in season 2, or, whatever that is. We're kind of staying fluid with that. We're leaving that open right now, but the plan right now is to not do seasons and to just keep a running list of episodes.
Got it. Excellent. Mary Kate asked, how does the length of the podcast compare to how long you are recording?
That is a great question. So the length of the podcast episodes has also varied so far. What I've found is when we're recording it, we typically cut about 10 minutes out in editing. So we recorded one episode that was, even for us, it was way too long. It was an hour-long episode. I don't want to listen to an hour-long episode of a podcast. So in hindsight, we were like, we've got to keep this tighter. We've got to keep it shorter. But I believe that one was about an hour and 10 minutes. And once it was edited down, it was an hour long. The most recent episode was, I believe, 47 minutes of the recording, and it ended up at 40 minutes. Um, as we've gone along, we've gotten a lot better about starting and stopping. So I think the more we do it and the more practice we get with it, the better we're going to get at, the number of retakes and things like that. But I would say we're usually only about 10 minutes longer on the recording versus the actual final episode.
Nice. Anybody else? Am I missing a question? Anybody else have a question before we wrap things up? All right, I'm not seeing anything popping up. So, Stephen, thank you very much for joining us. In 2 weeks, we'll be back with another episode. We'll be talking kind of about the flip side of this topic and some more about how to get speaking engagements and how to get on other people's podcasts. That will be with another guest. And so, with that, thank you, Stephen. And let me see. Okay. Um, Great. So, everybody have a great rest of day. I hope to see you back in a couple of weeks. And yeah, that's it. Thank you
Awesome.
much.
Thanks for hanging out.
Bye bye.